Welcome to the New Writer Podcast update for April 4th, 2015. It has been a fairly weird week for me. I've gotten a lot of progress done. I made quite a bit. I did close to 10,000 words this week, which when you have the ability, you have the ability to do 10,000 words in one day. Doing that in a week makes you feel like that comparisonitis for yourself that I try to avoid when I talk to writers about numbers of words they put down in a week. I try to avoid using specific numbers because that level is different for everyone. It's very individual and personalized. So 200 words in one day is a lot for some writers, and 200 words in 1 minute is nothing for some writers. So I try to make sure that I don't get into those specifics. But when you compare to yourself, you start to feel an extra level of pressure. So it's weird that I felt like all week this week I was going good, but my actual numbers aren't that great and not nearly where I want them to be. Fortunately, I do have a 3-day weekend this weekend. It is now 5:15 on Saturday night, and I haven't gotten much done today, but I still have 2 more days of this weekend to bust out a lot of work. What am I up to this week? I am doing something kind of interesting this week. Part of my writing group here in Helena, Queen City Creatives, our organizer, Judy, actually recommended that we all look into being part of this thing called International Fake Journal Month. And I really liked the concept because for a long time I've been toying around with one of my secondary characters in the Seven Keys saga, Chad. He's part of the ensemble, but he doesn't ever really get the highlight, and I wanted to do more with him. So I decided that for International Fake Journal Month, I would do Chad's journal. So I actually set it up on Wattpad. It's available for anybody who wants to go and check that out, and you can find it at newwriterpodcast.com/Chad. That'll take you to the Wattpad page where the whole journal is. So what's interesting about this project is when I started writing Seven Keys, I drew a lot of influence from a very specific time in my life. When I was 19, 20 years old and living in Springfield, Missouri. A lot of the things that the emotional journey of that makes its way into the Seven Keys saga. Well, Chad as a character is 5 years younger than my main character, Terry. And so I went deeper into things that went on in my life for Chad's journal, Chad's blog. And the way I set it up was I wanted Chad's web presence basically to emulate a 17-year-old kid using LiveJournal. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm writing a fictional LiveJournal account on Wattpad. So far, I've also been editing it a little bit. I wasn't going to, but I use Grammarly, and there was a lot of red and green squiggly lines, and some part of me has gotten to the point where I just can't stand those anymore. I have to fix them. I have to go back and correct them. My original intention was for it to be as purely authentic as a teenager's journal would be. So I was going to use just leave typos and spelling errors and all that stuff in, but I've gotten to this place where I can't do that anymore as a writer, and that's weird for me because I'm not exactly great at the editing side of stuff in general. So, but it's been fun. I'm 4 days into it, and I'm actually have to fight the urge to put a storyline together because it's just a journal. It's not supposed to be a story, which is counterintuitive to a writer. Once they get used to creating stories, it becomes counterintuitive to just write these little snippets and slices of life that don't necessarily amount to anything. But I'm kind of trying to push it through to my readers as saying, this is your opportunity. If you read the Seven Keys saga and you have questions about the world and you would like them filtered through the eyes of a 17-year-old artificer, then you can ask them right now, which is why I chose Wattpad instead of doing it on my own personal blog. Wattpad is in my mind, the way I think of it is the next evolutionary step of LiveJournal. When I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I used LiveJournal a lot for my own personal journal, but also I was a member of a lot of like online role-playing forum style games, and which basically amounted to interactive fan fiction, and it was all about you creating these stories and then other people commenting on them. And so like the social aspect of LiveJournal and the fiction aspect of LiveJournal have been kind of purified on Wattpad. And I don't know if I'm using Wattpad correctly, if that's what Wattpad is for, but that's kind of what I want to use it for. And I'm hoping in the future more projects that I do that are just things that I want to give to readers, or that I'm doing for like to working with my writing group, stuff that's not necessarily part of one of my series or novel that I think I would be able to put together and sell. Work that is fun and creatively fulfilling, but isn't necessarily commercial, or intended to be commercial. Like Chad's blog is not something I would put together as an ebook and try to sell. Now it is something I am copying and pasting those into Scrivener, because I think I've written quite a few short stories for the Seven Keys saga, and at some point I'd like to put them all together into one big collection, probably to give away for free, not necessarily to sell, but just give away in ebook format. And I think Chad's blog would go and just slide that in there. So I am keeping it in my big Seven Keys Saga Bible Scrivener file, which is huge and starting to slow down my computer. So I might need to rethink how I'm saving that information. I love Scrivener because it can just be this giant ever-growing binder full of location pictures and character descriptions and bios and stuff like that. But when your file does get to a certain size, it starts to get a little bogged down, and of course that's true for any any program out there when you're using a file once it gets to a certain size. So I think my advice on that would be to split that stuff. Like maybe I should just have a Scrivener file by itself that is my character bios and locations and stuff, that is, subsect my Seven Keys Bible into multiple Scrivener files, as if I had multiple 3-ring binders on the wall behind me, which is, I think, the way Scrivener is set up to work. It's not really designed to be a world binder so much as a project binder, but you can use it that way, and it's actually a great program for that, as long as you keep from crossing the, well, I'm pushing 100 megs in one file, which doesn't sound like a lot to a lot of us, but it is actually, when you're considering a text file, that's a pretty huge file. And my computer's not exactly great. I do have a newer computer, but I like to use my old crappy computer for writing, because my newer computer can play video games. And so when I'm on that computer, I'm like, oh, but I could just be playing WoW or Skyrim and not getting anything done. So I try to use my old crappy computer. I'm also looking at replacing my old crappy computer with I'm actually looking at saving up to buy like a Mac Mini. I'm not an Apple fan. I have a lot of prejudice against Apple for a lot of reasons that I'm not going to go into on this podcast. That's not the point of this podcast. But and I definitely don't think a Mac is a better computer for creativity just because it's a Mac. But I would like to be able to go direct to the Apple Store for ebook sales, and the only way you can do that is if you have a Mac. And Mac Mini is, the same price as a real computer, instead of 3 or 4 times the price of what the parts are worth. So I'm actually looking at maybe doing that and replacing my old computer with a new computer, a new Mac that is dedicated to strictly the craft stuff. I actually do most of my writing in my drafting in Google Docs anyway, so it's not like it would be a huge inconvenience to have to move stuff over. And the reason I use Google Docs is because I have a Chromebook that I primarily use for writing when I'm not at home. And If you're familiar with a Chromebook, it's basically, or if you're unfamiliar with a Chromebook, it is basically a laptop computer that only runs Google Chrome. So when you're not somewhere with Wi-Fi and have access to all the things that you can do on the internet, which is basically anything you can do on a computer is now available on the internet. But when you're out and about, you have access to Google Docs, and that's about it. So it's actually a great tool for me to be able to go and sit by the lake and have only my writing environment available to me. I usually take my Kindle with me, so I have music to play at the same time, and that's basically my process. So that actually brings me to one last thing I'd like to talk about this week. Is this epiphany that I just had a little while ago. I am 20,000 words into 7 Keys 5, and I realize, if you'll pardon the vulgarity of my language, I blew my load too soon. I had this thought of doing something a little different with the story structure, of having the story go up to the middle point and being like, okay, now that story's done, and then having things continue without the story, like having the reader go, oh, that's done, so what's all the rest of this? And I think it's a great story, like, mechanic. It's a thing that you can do as a writer. I've actually read quite a few books where you're like, oh, well, that problem is taken care of, everything's gonna be happy now, then whoa, super darkness comes. I don't think I'm good enough to execute that yet. So I'm getting ready to start on the second half of the book, which was like my big plot stuff, and going, I think I climaxed too soon. I hit that high point, and now everything feels weak. So it built a block in my head. And this was like Friday night, so it's been one day, and I've been struggling with trying to figure out how to overcome this little block that I've come up with. And I had an epiphany. I realized you can rewrite crap, guys. You don't have to go with what it is. Like, I like the Heinlein's rules, where it's, don't rewrite unless editorial demand, but that's stupid. It's like saying, because I wrote it, now I'm stuck with it, and that's simply not true. I mean, you can say, okay, this was good for what it was, but it wasn't what I needed it to be, so I'll rewrite it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually getting ready to marathon write, as long as I can keep myself focused, hopefully for the next 2.5 days. I'm just going to bust out as much of the second half of the book as I can, and I'm going to base it on the assumption that the first half of the book, it will be rewritten to match whatever I'm writing in the second half of the book, and I'll do that. I mean, that's not like the advice here. The point here is not to write half a book and go, oh, this isn't good enough, and then write a second half of the book and just leave it that way. No, the idea is to minimize the amount of rewriting I have to do, by, instead of forcing myself to continue with the book the way it's not working, to recognize that right now at chapter 16 of this book, the story is not working the way I want it to. The way I want it to work needs to go in a different direction. I will write the second half of the book in that direction, and then go back and fix the first half of the book. And you can do that. It's okay to do that. You don't have to start completely over from scratch, which is a lesson you would think I would learn, but honestly, it took me 9 months of writing, like trying to write at the professional level of completing work, to realize that it was okay to go back and just completely start over anyway. So now I'm at this place where I'm like, it's okay to just scrap what you've got, but you don't necessarily have to, because it can be fixed. A lot of the stuff that I've written is good and can be used, and it might have to just be a matter of rearranging how some of the storyline falls, but I don't have to keep going just because that's what I've written so far. I can fix it as long as I fix it. Now, some people out there might be hearing me say this and go, oh, well, that means I can just change and get better in the middle of the book and whatever. But that's not the point. The point is, really, in indie publishing, you can fix it whenever. You should fix it definitely as much as possible before you hit the first publish button. But even then, if you go back to something a year later and go, this is only sort of okay, you can fix it if you want. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend getting it as close to perfect as you can the first time, but you can change it. You can go back and fix it. And so give yourself that permission. It all comes back to that: give yourself permission to suck, which I've always carried with me as it's okay to suck on the first draft because I'm going to rewrite it. And now I'm going, it's okay to suck for half of the draft because I can rewrite half of the draft. I don't have to focus on being entirely perfect every time, or even having the story can suck the first time. The story can get fixed and better. You can go back and put things in that need to be there, or take things out that don't need to be there, and it's okay to do that. So that was your weekly update from me. I am right now at about 20,000 words in Seven Keys 5. It is still over a month now behind where I wanted to be done with this draft, but I do feel like my writing stamina is starting to pick back up and kick back in. It has been a very long first quarter of the year. Update a little bit on the publishing sales side, because I feel like that is just as important as the writing side once the writing stuff's done. I'm still sticky between 10 and 15 downloads per day on Seven Keys 1 on Choices. I am starting to see a slowdown on that graph from the spike I got from Fussy Librarian, which is okay. I wasn't really expecting too much. Choices is my weakest book, but it's also the first book in the series, so it's the one that's permanently free. I am starting to see a little bit of carryover sales, but I'm still at that 2% read-through rate between book 1 and book 2 based on downloads, which isn't so bad considering, the majority of those downloads are free downloads, so a lot of those people probably haven't even read it at all. And I have to keep telling myself that. So March's sales paid for the Fussy Librarian ad easily enough. It paid for my web hosting and this podcast hosting, and allowed me to actually upgrade my podcast hosting to the 250 megs at Libsyn from the 50, so I don't have to worry nearly as much about time constraints or breaking things up or skipping a couple of weeks when I'm out of data on my hosting plan. So that means I can now actually keep doing the weekly updates and start strongly pursuing doing more interviews, because I miss doing the interviews. I really enjoyed them. My reading was a little slower this week, but I am about to hit 60 books for the year. My personal goal of hitting 150 is seeming pretty doable right now, so I'm going to keep pushing through with that and try to still hit my writing goal that I'm not going to tell you about because you'll laugh at me when I don't hit it, but I'm still going to try. I'm going to try really hard to hit it. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening or watching. Feel free to comment at newwriterpodcast.com or on YouTube, or send me an email, contact@newwriterpodcast.com. You can leave a review on iTunes, would be awesome. Just saying. But thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.